Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1993 direct-to-cable sequel, When a Stranger Calls Back. Now, before I share my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Brock for requesting this review. If there's a specific film that you would like to see me review or a topic you'd like to hear me discuss, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description. Now, onto the review. This particular film, to me, is an underrated gem. It's a real diamond in the rough. I don't think this movie gets nearly enough credit. I don't think this film gets talked about enough when it comes to underrated or legitimately solid sequels. And I think that's honestly too bad because this film holds up really well. And I honestly thought this was better than the first, at least for me personally. I think it's a more consistent film in terms of its quality. I don't think it really suffers nearly as much as the first film does when it comes to the middle of the movie, or even when it comes to the film's overall weaknesses, which there really aren't too many weak points with this movie. For the most part, it's quite strong. And it's a film I was somewhat familiar with before I watched it the most recent time around because I had seen it years ago. A friend of mine introduced it to me, and I remember the film leaving an imprint on me, in particular the ending. I thought the ending was unlike anything that I had seen before, and it still is incredibly unique, and in a good way. So the film is once again directed by Fred Walton, who returned to the director's chair. This time around, Steve Feck doesn't join him when it comes to writing the movie. He does double duty as writer and director. And at this point in his career, he had a lot more experience writing full films and so on and so forth. So I think he definitely used that to his advantage and created a much more effective and consistently uh, good script, despite some issues. Um, Interestingly enough, the first 15 minutes of this film are nowhere near as suspenseful or as terrifying as the first 20 minutes of the first movie. So it's an interesting dynamic that's going on here with the story and with the overall screenplay, where the first part of the movie is not really that great. It's kind of middling. But then the rest of the film is more consistent in terms of overall quality than what occurred previously in the last installment in the franchise. Uh, I think the idea behind the opening is solid. It's sound. Introduce the new killer, the new psycho, in a different way. Play with the trope some more. Make it so it is another babysitter alone in a house that she's babysitting in, but this time around, it seems as if the killer is outside the house. But then the twist is that he's been in the house the whole time. So, there was some interesting stuff that they did with the intro, but I think it's too dialogue heavy. There's a lot of dialogue in this first 10-15 minutes, and I think it definitely hurts the suspense because a lot of this just goes back and forth to the guy outside who has car trouble and Jill Schoelen's character, Julia, being like, hey, I called. Nobody answered. And then the guy still being like, "Are you sure? I don't think you called them." It got really old after a while. Um, but fortunately, after that weak start, that weak beginning, the film really does pick up pace and really starts to ramp up and elevate its storytelling and its overall effectiveness as a source of entertainment or as a suspense thriller. Um, in particular, I really love how this sequel incorporates and expands upon the characters from the first movie, but in a way where it doesn't feel like it's just a rehash. It doesn't feel like it's just a lazy copy and paste of the same character traits or the same characterization as the characters in the first film. They actually grow. You see them grow. You see different takes on them. Uh, I would say Charles Durning is the one that kind of stays the same, to be fair, but he didn't need to change that much anyway. He was just a retired private investigator who was brought on board to help investigate this particular case because as a favor for Jill. So I think what they decided to do with the character, I thought it worked. And in particular with Jill Johnson, Carol Kane's character, I really loved that Fred gave her an arc in terms of she grew into her own when it comes to her profession. She became a therapist of sorts for kids out of college. And not only that, she can hold her own. She's someone who took self defense. She can believably kick some ass. And it was really nice to see Carol Kane play that kind of role, something that normally you don't see her kind of do. So I like the fact that Jill was no longer this terrorized victim. She was a strong character in so many different ways, and she becomes the rock for Julia, one of the only people that believes her. Because I mean, if you hear things from the outside about what's going on with Julia, you would think that she might be crazy. She had a traumatic experience years ago when she was a babysitter with this crazy guy that was in the house she was babysitting in. The guy escaped. The two kids she was babysitting went missing and never been found. 5 years later, she sees a kid's sweater in her closet. She doesn't have any kids. She doesn't know how it got there. And then there's all these things that are going on. She's things are moving around in her apartment. She's being tormented by what might as well be a ghost. And she's telling people these things, and they understandably don't believe her. They think she's just having a mental breakdown. She did it herself when she was sleeping or something. And she's trying to explain to them, no, it's like there's somebody in there, and I know my door is deadbolted 3 times, but I didn't do this. And the only person that believes her is Jill, because she's dealt with a similar kind of terror about somebody hiding in a house in plain sight. And speaking of hiding in plain sight, this script does a really spectacular job adding a new element and approach to that particular idea, where the killer in this film is literally hiding in plain sight, but in a way that is so unique and so original and so creative. He manipulates his voice to make it appear as if he's in another room or he's outside. And on top, because he's a ventriloquist, and on top of his ventriloquist abilities, he's also a master chameleon when it comes to paint. So he uses paint and other makeup to blend into the shadows, or in the case of the film's really effective climax, he blends into an entire brick wall. So that particular aspect of the script I thought was absolutely awesome, and I really want to give Fred Walton a ton of credit for that, because I really loved that mix of two different traits for a killer, where he's a ventriloquist but that he's also a master chameleon. I thought that was a really brilliant touch, and it really added for a different and refreshing dynamic for the film when it comes to telling another story about another crazy guy who gets involved with Charles Durning and Carol Kane. But this time around, it's not like he's the son of Kurt, or he's a relative. It's a completely different character, a completely different enemy. And I think that's really what a lot of horror films should do, especially when it comes to sequels. Like, unless it's something like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. But when it comes to this kind of thing, if you're going to do another When a Stranger Calls, then do something different. Don't just have it be the relative, the son of the caller, or any of that. And don't just do the same typical sort of phone calls And I like the fact that no, it doesn't go that route. That's a reason. That's a big reason why I like it. Um, and there's other scenes that are well written too. Like speaking of ventriloquism, the sequence when the ventriloquist is doing his act at this bar. It's a very unsettling and creepy scene that really shows you that this guy is completely off his rocker in a very memorable and striking way. I mean, he's painted himself entirely in black paint, and he's got this ventriloquist dummy that has no face, and that stuff just creeps me out anyway. Things that look human and have human appearances but don't have eyes and a mouth have always freaked me out. I think the reason why is because a lot, the saying is the eyes are the window to the soul, and when you don't have eyes, you can't really see humanity. It's very cold, and I feel that that's definitely the case with this ventriloquist dummy that the killer is using. But that alone in itself isn't enough to make that scene as effective as it is. Then you have the writing, which is top notch and terrific, with this crazy guy and his ramblings that just really make you feel uncomfortable. And speaking of uncomfortable, there's a really great sequence in the film where you think that the character Julia is you think that she's safe in the hospital because it just looks like a regular establishing shot, but then out of nowhere, with no warning, with no music stings, with nothing to really prepare you for it, out of the shadows comes the killer. No words, doesn't say anything. He does start messing with her though, and then he goes back into the darkness, and you're like, I mean, it's just such a creepy thing to imagine being in that vulnerable of a position, alone in a hospital room, and there's some crazy stalker killer who is in the same room as you, and you don't know it. And by the way, the character Julia, she was in a coma at this time, so it's not like she, could have technically, she would not have known if he was in there to begin with, if he was standing right in front of her. But the audience doesn't know that he's there, and there's no reason to assume that he would be there. So that's what makes that scene so intense and so suspenseful and just hand wringing when it comes to the chills and the amount of suspense that scene provides, because you don't know what he's going to do. You're like, is he going to kill her? Is he going to finish the job? But no, he just messes with her some more until something happens where he has to leave. But yeah, I thought they did a good job with that. And of course the finale in Jill's apartment complex where the killer disguises himself as a part of the brick wall. That just blew me away the first time I saw it, and it's still a really effective scene all these years later. Um, so overall, I mean, I am pretty pleased with the film in terms of the screenwriting, in terms of the story. I mean, even the character Julia, I felt for her. I mean, she went through an incredibly traumatic experience when she was a teenager with and babysitting and dealt with this crazy psycho, and now people don't believe her, and all these things are happening in her home that she doesn't know the reason for. Things are missing, things are being moved, and it's just an incredibly harrowing and terrifying experience, and nobody believes her, so it just makes her even more isolated, even more insular, even more withdrawn, and even more prone to um, a mental breakdown. Like, you really do feel for this poor girl. Uh, and the sequences with Joe Johnson are really good, and it's really nice to see her character evolve. And it's one of Carol Kane's best performances. I mean, she's an underrated actress anyway. She's really talented, and this role as well as her role in the first film, really do prove that to be the case. And Charles Durning still as good, still as effective as an actor as ever. I will say this, Jill Schoelen, she was uneven once again. Jill Schoelen's an actress that I like. She's a sweetheart. But her best effort is B or B minus. And her worst or even her average effort is usually on average worse than most actors or actresses. It's nothing that I necessarily like despise or loathe about her, because she makes up for it in some ways because she has a certain quirky personality and charisma about her. But she just doesn't have the range as an actress to really elevate her performance to a level that is really quite compelling. And this is one of her better performances, but at the end of the day, it's still pretty adequate at best. So it would have been nice to have seen maybe another actress in this role. A friend of mine was spitballing some things with me, and talking about other actresses who've been in horror films, like Lisa Wilcox or Tracy Lynn or Catherine Mary Stewart. So it would have been interesting to have seen someone else's take on the character Julia. The way the character is written is very strong, and I do feel for the character. But I don't really think Jill Schoelen was really the best actress for the role. That being said, it was still nice to see her. And they really did that girl dirty when I would say the scariest thing about this movie is the fucking mullet that they gave Jill Schoelen for the rest of the movie after the first 15 minutes or so. By doing her dirty, they fucking screwed her over. They gave her this horrifyingly awful mullet that wasn't flattering at all. They also gave her a wardrobe that made her look frumpy and just really worse for wear. And I think that might have been the point, because they might have done that on purpose, because she's dealing with this killer who's hiding out in her apartment, and she's dealing with people thinking she's nuts and so on and so forth. And so she's next to the edge of insanity, so to speak. But they still could have done something different. They still could have handled things better. Why give her a fucking mullet from hell? Why? Why do you got to do that? Why do you got to do that to poor Jill? Especially when in the first 15 minutes she's got this sexy short haircut that really fits her, that really looks great on her. Why couldn't she just have the same haircut 5 years later? Why would she all of a sudden decide 5 years later that I want to look like a fucking trucker or some shit? Like, I want to look like, why the fuck do you want to make her look like that? Give her a haircut that is just so nightmarish. That mullet was the opposite of marvelous. It was really fucking bad. It was almost so bad it was mesmerizing at times, because you were just like, what? Is it a wig? It's got to be just a bad wig, right? It can't actually be her hairstyle. You would think that she wouldn't do that to herself willingly. But yeah, other than Jill Schoelen and her uneven performance and her horrifyingly bad mullet, the only other thing that I wasn't too big on, other than also the first 15 minutes that I mentioned already, was the score, which was done by Dana Kaproff, who did the music for the first film and did such an amazing job with that. I don't know what happened here. This score is forgettable. It's not bad, but it's not good. It's just your epitome of an average, everyday, milquetoast, white bread TV movie score with synthesizer work and really nothing that interesting or intriguing. It didn't really elevate that many scenes. like his score did for the first film. Disappointing to me because of how well and how wonderful of a job he did with the score of the first film. From other technical standpoints, the film is really good, especially for a cheap, made for Showtime original movie. The cinematography by David Geddes and the editing by David Byron Lloyd. I thought both of those technical aspects of the production were really well done. I thought they did a great job for little money and for the TV cable landscape. There are a lot of times where this film doesn't really look like it's just a cheap cable movie. There are moments where it kind of look, you can see it a little bit, but for the most part it doesn't look that way, which I think is really a testament to the performance, the high grade performance from people involved with the film when it comes to the crew, the cinematographer, the editor, of course, the director Fred Walton, and other people who worked on the crew, like the production and art designer, the lighting director, and everyone else. Um, and the makeup artists. I really thought the makeup artists who were the ones that were really responsible for making the illusion of this killer being a chameleon as convincing as it ultimately wound up being. I definitely wanted to say that they were at the top of their game as well. Um, it's amazing and absolutely just jaw dropping if you think about it, what they were able to do and accomplish with just regular stage makeup. There really wasn't much prosthetics or anything that was used. It was all done with, you know, stage or theatrical makeup and, a lot of ingenuity and imagination. And it's the kind of film that it's a simple, straightforward plot, much like the first movie, but there's enough twists and turns and there's enough things that are going on with how things are handled that it doesn't feel like it's just a generic thriller or a generic cable movie or even a generic sequel. Um, yeah, I really don't know what else to say about When a Stranger Calls Back, except I highly recommend it. If you were a fan of the first one, I think it's definitely worth a look. If it's a film that you've heard of but you haven't gotten around to seeing, definitely feel that you should check it out sometime. And if it's a movie that you weren't too big on the first time around, just like I said with the first movie, it's worth giving another shot. I would say this is one of the better thrillers and definitely one of the better sequels of the 90s, especially from this particular genre. There were some good sequels in the horror or thriller genre in the 90s, but this was one of the better ones. And yeah, I really don't know what else to say except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.